Deep in a remote forest, we invited 6 professionals from industry and academia to discuss how artificial intelligence is changing our society. These are the insights from their conversation. Welcome to AI Campfire.
And there's meant to be decision-making principles to guide us in uncertain times when things are advancing so quickly. But right now, there are questions over human rights and what does this mean for how AI is used. So a good example of this is the use of AI algorithms in policing. Right now, we have algorithms predicting whether someone's going to commit a crime, what the crime could be. And there's obviously huge issues rife with bias, fairness, but also is this leading to two-tier societies where if you're from a certain postcode or a certain region that's, committing petty crimes because of things like poverty, you might be stuck in this algorithmic feedback loop of continually being over-policed. So the big question right now is for everyone, say, human rights, how do you actually apply this to AI, and what does the future of AI look like in a world where it's making such important decisions about people's lives and future?
I think before we get to policing, I think we should first of all state that the biases we see in AI are human biases in the training data. So in many ways, the AI does us a service by surfacing them, making us aware, and now we can do better, right?
Fundamentally, the model that we're using is inherently biased. We're actually sitting here and we're in the global minority. 30% of the population doesn't have access to the internet, so it's completely skewed. It's not gender representative, it's not diverse. So, and we're relying on that data to then overlay that on communities that actually are not represented in the data at all. That is also something we need to be aware of, and the general public isn't really aware of that.
What's the diversity of those developing it as well? If you have a certain group that is not as inclusive in the build of it, how do you expect it then to not be biased in that sense?
I'd say that that's actually a really, really profound point, right? Because if you ask certain LLMs about the history of predictive policing or even just policing generally of certain communities, it might not even give you an answer. It might say, oh, I'm not equipped to talk about that. Let's talk about something else that's far less controversial. And ironically, a lot of them have ethical filters in them where they try to stay away from controversial topics. But the unintended consequences, again, is that you're creating a homogenous society where we're training people to shy away from really difficult but important parts of history in terms of racial bias and even how we categorize crimes. If you have someone that's got a white mum and let's say a black father, if they commit a crime and they're mixed race, that's often categorized as black crime or being a crime from person of color. If that's sort of how rife the bias is from even the raw materials we're using to train algorithms, what can we do to even get to a position where we say we have AI that is unbiased, that we're actually saying this is fit for purpose now? How much work needs to be done?
If the premise is it must be fair and bias-free, then you probably also accept that those police officers you still have on the beat aren't used as efficiently, to use your term, as you could.
I think it comes back to, are we aiming to treat the symptom or are we aiming to treat the result of things as well? When we look at the purpose of law enforcement, are we aiming to stop a terrorist attack or a serious event like this, or are we looking to stop someone with petty theft? They're not the same thing. And I think if we treat them both in the same way and we just apply the technology towards it, then again, that's where the danger is.
The policing issue is a symptomatic issue, and I'm wondering whether AI can help with what's actually causing those crime hotspots. Like in Finland, for example, they did an amazing experiment that's still going on with homelessness. And there is no homelessness, not AI related, but actually what's happening is they're being reintegrated into society. So for me, my question is, can we use this to reduce the causes that cause that before we even get to the policing?
If the end goal of crime and punishment is punishment, then we lose the opportunity that AI can bring. I think AI can help to start mapping that data as it starts to identify these hotspots and then see why are these areas more crime prone than these areas, and then start to think about ways to tie, is this an economic thing? Is this a social thing? And then solve those problems rather than, oh, it just helps us catch this person, shoot them or put them in jail.
I think it's a great point, and I think it links to as well, what else is AI the opportunity for? Is it the opportunity to solve systematic issues that we see in society and taking the opportunity to solve the root cause of some of the problem?
I think that's a really interesting approach, right? When you look at like potentially using AI, predictive policing to even find hotspots of crimes and what the causes of those crimes could be, right? And I'm wondering how much we're really using that now as a use case. Around the world, a lot of the push to do these things is because it's scalable, particularly with software. It's a lot cheaper than having human police officers. And the idea is that we'd rather prioritize the accuracy of arguably equity.
I personally think society must decide collectively what predictive policing should look like. What level of surveillance or privacy intrusion is acceptable? Do we accept that there is in any public space facial recognition and your movements being tracked, your behavior is being analyzed, and potential anomalies, let's say for terrorist attacks, who we know may be behaving in a certain way, we can predict the likelihood. That may sound great, but then as you come straight back to the Minority Reports, you know, there's a good reason we have these human rights and we should hold dearly to them, you know. And do I accept that certain human rights are infringed or restricted for the greater good of all? I would, but it's a balance and it's not a clear-cut black or white. And contentious, no matter how you decide, right? Someone has a rightful claim that's wrong.
But I think, Professor Ram, I have an interesting one for you, because there's actually some case studies coming out of America with quadruped robots being used to basically stop armed shooters. And around the US, around the world actually, exploring robot police officers or robocops actually. How long is it going to be before we have a headline of an autonomous vehicle makes an arrest? But also in the very shorter term things we're seeing over the next few years, will we have armed robot police officers? Is that something that, again, is on the cards? Like, what are your thoughts on where robotics is heading in this space?
Technologically, yes, you could. If that's what one wants, one could have it.
That's reassuring. That's one can have it.
Not in my neighborhood, please. But
No, but I think that the more important point, and this goes to what we were discussing earlier, is that with issues like human rights and with kind of big issues like this, which are fundamentally contentious. In most countries, there's a process by which we discuss them. There's a process by which you can object. So the real problem with AI and autonomy kind of entering this space is that those processes are becoming more opaque. People don't understand the technology. Even experts aren't able to tell you with a great degree of certainty, if this is what is being presented to you. So all the difficulties around, false positives, false negatives, all of these things are fairly subtle issues that people don't understand. So even if you say, let's vote on it, they don't know what they're voting on. How do you ask people, is that what you want? And how can people protest and say, I don't want this, but I'm okay with that?
essentially what you're saying is, dear society, I have this technology which in 99 out of 100 cases will shoot the right guy. And I mean, how could anyone vote on that, right?
And the reality is, it's very, very hard to design a system that doesn't have false positives and false negatives. It doesn't make errors of two kinds.
That's impossible.
And then you make people kind of answer a very difficult question. If that is then mapped to human life, if that's then mapped to, loss of human rights, that what is that cost you're willing to pay?
That is one of the biggest problems to solve when it comes to AI ethics. Shoots the right guy 99 out of 100, but is that 1 out of 100 going to be from the same race or background? Do you take the human bias where you don't really understand it fully, which can vary so much from person to person, or do you take the machine one, which might be an aggregate of other biases, but maybe more predictable in certain ways? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
It comes down to accountability as well. If a person makes a mistake, whether it's in the context of law enforcement or HR or business, education, whatever it is, it's that person's name on the dotted line that made that decision. Whereas if a machine or a system makes a mistake, who's accountable for that? If those lines of accountability are clear, I think course, it's still an ethical issue, but it's a little bit more cut and dry, at least, of where the buck stops, especially in the interconnected world that we're going into, where any AI system that's built has an ecosystem of 10, 15 organisations building it. The lines are going to become very blurred, I think, and it's going to become very complex as to where that buck stops.
But in terms of accountability, when you look at law enforcement, what are some ways that we think that this could actually be feasible? Is auditing going to be the future, where you have like an accountability checklist or framework of trained people? Is that the best approach? Or again, is this a space where it's a good chance to say we might need something completely new that we haven't done before?